Assalamualaikum and have a nice day. My name is Muhammad Azhafiza bin Yahya, and today I will be presenting my research title, The Impact of Volunteer Motivation on the Commitment in SUKMA Events. This study was conducted as part of the course Research Methodology in Behavioural Science and Sport, SRT656, under the guidance of Sir Muhammad Faizal bin Kutib. This presentation is divided into three main chapters. The first one is introduction, which includes the background, problem statement, objectives, questions, hypothesis and significance. The second one is literature review that discusses key concepts and related studies. And the last one is methodology, where I explain the design, sampling, instruments and data collection process. For background of study, SUKMA is a large-scale sports event in Malaysia, and it relies heavily on volunteers. These volunteers handle essential tasks such as logistics, athlete support, crowd control and more. However, despite their importance, volunteers are often overlooked. This research focuses on understanding what motivates volunteers and how that motivation impacts their commitment, which is crucial for the event's success. And now for problem statement. In recent SUKMA events, low volunteer motivation has caused problems such as high turnover, poor service and reduced performance. This shows there may be gaps in the support systems or recognition efforts. That's why it is important to study this issue so we can identify effective ways to improve volunteer experience and outcomes. Research objective. This study aims to determine the level of volunteer motivation, describe the level of volunteer commitment, and investigate whether there is a significant relationship between motivation and commitment. And then research question. The study is guided by these questions. What is the level of motivation among SUKMA volunteers? Next is what is their level of commitment? And the last one is there a link between the two? The hypotheses are more training and support will increase motivation. Higher motivation will lead to better volunteer performance. And then motivated volunteers are more likely to return and stay committed for future events. For significance of study is, this study is important for future SUKMA planning. The findings can help improve volunteer recruitment and retention strategies and promote stronger culture of civic participation in Malaysia. It can also guide other sports or community events that rely on volunteer efforts. For the limitations is, some limitations were set on purpose to keep the study focused. It focuses only on SUKMA events. It uses a quantitative approach only. It only includes volunteers, not athletes or staff. And the main variable is volunteer support. Next is limitation. Some challenges were out of our control, such as data was based on self-reports, which can be biased. Time constraints limited to amount of data collected. External factors like others' commitments or distractions were not controlled. The findings may not apply to other events or countries. For assumption is, I assume that volunteer motivation does affect commitment. Participants answered the questionnaire honestly. Volunteer commitment can be measured by behavior and emotions. And then the sample represents the general SUKMA volunteer population. For operational terms, Some important terms in this study. The first one, volunteer motivation, the internal or external reasons that drive a person to volunteer. Second one is volunteer commitment, the level of dedication shown by the volunteer. And the third one is motivation commitment relationship, how motivation impacts their willingness to stay. And the last one is participation in SUKMA, that is involvement as volunteers in SUKMA events. And now we go through literature review. Past studies agree that volunteers are crucial for sports events. However, many events face the problem of volunteer turnover. So we need to understand what keeps volunteers motivated and committed. The key ideas discussed. Volunteer motivation includes factors like personal growth, social bonding, recognition or learning. Volunteer commitment depends on satisfaction and the volunteer's emotional attachment to the event or organization. When motivation is low, retention drops and turnover increases. And the last one is retaining volunteers reduces costs and improves event quality. And this is my conceptual framework. This framework shows that volunteer support and motivation influence their level of commitment. It's the basis of for forming the hypothesis and structuring the questionnaire. This is a quantitative study. I used to survey questionnaire to gather data from selected volunteers. 100 SUKMA volunteers from the past 2 years were selected using purposive sampling. They were chosen because they have relevant experience, which increases the reliability of the results. The questionnaire was designed to cover all aspects of motivation and commitment. It was tested in a pilot study to ensure reliability and clarity before final data collection. The process involves 10 clear steps, starting with setting objective, designing the survey, testing it, contacting volunteers, collecting data, and finally analyzing and reporting the findings. Each step was done with proper planning and supervisor's feedback. This chart shows the timeline of my research from proposal to final report. It helped ensure that all tasks were complete within the semester schedule. First, for the demographic overview, I will use frequency and percentage to describe the background of the respondents, such as age, gender, and volunteer experience. Next, to answer research question 1, which is about the level of volunteer motivation, I will use descriptive statistics, specifically the mean and standard deviation, to identify the overall motivation score among SUKMA volunteers. For research question 2, which look at the level of volunteer commitment, I will apply the same method, descriptive statistics, to find out how committed the volunteers are during the event. And finally, to answer research question 3, which explores whether there is a significant relationship between motivation and commitment, I will use multiple regression analysis. This will help me understand how different types of motivation influence volunteer commitment. That's all for the data analysis part of my research.